Blessed to be here tonight. It's a blessing to be alive in a society where people are dying all around us. Every day we hear about people dying. I was blessed this morning to video an interview of a lady who was 100 years old. Sister Diane Allen interviewed the lady and she asked me to video, and I had the privilege of listening to this lady's story. An amazing story. This lady is 100 years old. She has more energy than me. She walks around, she takes care of herself, she cooks, she cleans, she's totally self-sufficient. As a matter of fact, she's taking care of her daughter. And that was a blessing to hear her story. And as I was listening to her story, I was thinking about this class, and I was thinking about the fact that we've been studying Joseph's story. Then I thought about the fact that we all have a story. Every one of us have a story. Everyone has a story. And what would you think that your story would read like? What do you think 100 years from now, if someone were to read your story as we're reading Joseph's story, how would your story read? Come back to that in a minute. The Bible says in Romans 15, verse 4, whatsoever things are written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. And that's why we've been studying the story of Joseph, because we've been looking at his life, and we've been learning lessons from his life that gives us comfort, gives us hope for the things that we experience in our lives. Isn't that right? And so what I thought we'd do tonight, before we pick up the story of Joseph, is that we would kind of review, we would kind of look at some of the lessons that we've learned from the life of Joseph, that we would just kind of make a practical application of some of the stories that we have learned in his life. You know, life is about living, learning, and sharing, right? It's about living this life, learning lessons along the way, and sharing those lessons with others. And I thought about some of the lessons that I've learned in my life. I've learned many lessons from my father, my biological father, but they weren't from instruction. Most of the lessons I learned from my father, I learned by observing, by looking at his story, by seeing his story and seeing some things that I should do, and more importantly, some things I should not do from his example. And that's the way life is. You learn wherever you can. Isn't that right? And anyone can teach anyone. But I want you to think about this. And you don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to share if you do not want to. But I want to give you food for thought. I want you to give you something to think about as you think about your story, as you think about your life, your journey to your palace, and some of the lessons that you have learned, in your journey. I want you to think about that. Okay? Let's look at some of the lessons that we've learned from a study of Joseph's story. One of the lessons that we learned from studying the life of Joseph was that it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional your background, or how dysfunctional your family, or what you come out of. God has a purpose and a plan for your life. Isn't that right? This is one of the things we learned from the story of Joseph. Joseph came from a dysfunctional family. He came from a family, where it was just a lot of drama. But yet that did not hinder God from executing his plan in the life of Joseph. And some of us have come from some, dysfunctional backgrounds. Isn't that right? But not only that, Satan uses our past as one of his tools to hold us down. One of Satan's biggest tools is guilt. Satan uses people's past failures to hold them down and keep them shackled and non-productive in the present. Isn't that right? Not only does he use guilt, but he uses the pain of our past. The pain of our past, hurts and disappointments. And he uses those things to hold us down, to keep us down. But it doesn't matter what disappointment, what pain, what guilt you have in your past. God can still use us in the present. God is bigger than whatever our problems and our issues are. Isn't that right? I recorded a wedding in June. It was actually a 50th wedding anniversary in New Orleans of a couple who had been married for 50 years and they were renewing their vows. And I remember the groom. I remember a statement that he made as he was talking about how he didn't know how God gave him this Christian wife that he had. That when he was out there before, he was married, he said he was wild. He said he did some of everything, and his wife was a Christian. And she was the one who brought him to Christ. And he made a statement that I'm reminded of right now. He said, it doesn't matter, where you come from, where you start, is where you finish. God can take you from whatever you come from, and he can use you. And he made that and applied that to his life. And I thought that was profound. And it's also very true. Isn't that right? Now, another lesson that we learned as we studied Joseph's story, we learned the fact that there are lessons to be learned as we travel along this way, in our journey, on our journey to our palace, whatever that may be. There are lessons that we need to learn as we make these stops. Joseph learned lessons in the pit. He learned lessons in Potiphar's house. He learned lessons in the prison. Isn't that right? And all the lessons that he learned in these stops benefited him when he got to the palace, when he got to where God wanted him to be. If we fail to learn the lesson, brothers and sisters, it makes our journey that much longer. If you think about the stops that you've made in your life, if you look at your life and you look at some of the things that you've been through, think about the lessons that you've learned at these places, at these junctures in your life. Think about the fact that if you've not learned the lessons at those junctures, you're still going through it. Isn't that right? God will put you through it until you get the lesson, until you get the message. Let me ask you a question. I've said throughout this series thus far that, like Joseph, we are all on our way to a palace. Isn't that right? We said Joseph's palace was in Pharaoh's house, and God had a purpose for him being there. And I said that we all are on our way to a palace. We don't know what the palace is, but there is a palace that God has for all of us. My question to you is, do you know what your palace is? Does anyone in here know what their palace is? Where God is leading you, what God has in store for you in this life? And before you answer too quickly, Joseph didn't know. Joseph did not know that he was on his way to the palace. When he was in the pit, when he was in Potiphar's house, when he was in the prison, he did not know that God was setting him up for the palace. All right? Here's the question that I bring out of that. If you don't know your destination, how can you know the way? If you don't know where you're headed, how can you know where you're going or how to get there? You see? Go ahead.
Okay. From my knowledge, what Scripture has shown me, you see how Joseph always gave knowledge back to God, so he knew the Scripture, he understood the Word. And it says that your Word, O Lord, is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. When you get to John 14, Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. So, you know how we always talk about keeping your hands in God's hands. If you're following the teachings of the Father, because just like with Abraham, he just told him to get up and go. Sometimes in life, he has to move you. It's not for you to know where that you're going, because some people will start bragging if they was knowing they was getting to the palace.
That you brought up, that we don't know, so we have to rely upon God. So we follow God's instructions, we follow God's word, and he will guide us, he will lead us to where he wants us to be. We don't have to know the way. We can't know the way if we don't know the destination. like Joseph, he didn't know what the final destination is. He did know because he was given that revelation. He was given that dream that his family, his mother and father and his brothers would bow down to him. So he knew that. He didn't know when, he didn't know where, he didn't know how, but he knew that. And that tells me this, that sometimes God gives you a glimpse of where he's heading you. You know, that was a glimpse of where Joseph was going. He didn't know what to make of it, but God showed him just a little bit. And if you stop and think about your life, somewhere along the way, God gives us a glimpse of what our palace is going to be, what it is, where it is he's leading us to, But we have to, like Joseph, and that's the next lesson we're going to talk about, you have to be faithful to God. You have to be obedient to his word. You have to follow his direction. You have to go where he leads you. Because if you try to go this way when God is trying to steer you that way, it's going to take longer for you to get over here where God wants you, because now you have a longer route to go. Go ahead.
And your daily prayer should be, Lord, place those people in my path that will direct me, that you would have me to do, whatever your purpose is for my life. Place those people. Give me the wisdom to know that that's the person that you want me to do whatever it is that I'm here to do. We're all here for a purpose. What? Only the Lord knows. Just direct my path. Put me where I need to be to serve you better.
See, as I stated at the beginning of the class, Romans 15:4 teaches us that, those things that were written before were written to give us comfort, to give us hope, to teach us. So when we look at the life of Joseph and we see what Joseph went through, and we knew that the scriptures clearly teaches that God was with Joseph every step of the way, every stop he made, the Lord was with him and the Lord prospered him in whatever stop he made. That's comforting to us, when we find ourselves in a pit, or we find ourselves, in a situation, in a place that's not comfortable for us at the time. But we know that the scriptures teach, and Joseph's example shows us that the Lord is with us. In fact, his word said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. So that's comforting to us. So you're not there alone, because that's one of Satan's tools. He wants you to feel isolated, feel like God has abandoned you, God has forsaken you. That's what he wants.
Also, we have to keep in mind that we have to have patience.
Mm-hmm.
We got to have time. And we cannot rush, skip, hop, or jump through what God wants us to do and to where he's leading us to. So if we don't have that patience and that time, we're going to stumble and fall each time. And then where do we go? Back to the beginning.
That was the next lesson that we were coming to about what we learned in studying this story of Joseph. We learned that Joseph's journey began at his father's house, right? And he was how old? 17 years old, right? And then he made a stop in the pit, right? And then he made a stop in Potiphar's house, right? Then he made a stop where? In prison, right? Then he went to the palace before Pharaoh. Now, from this point, his father's house, till he appeared before Pharaoh, he was 30 years old when he appeared before Pharaoh. He was 17 when he started off. That's 13 years between his father's house and Pharaoh's house. But not only that, before the story ended, it was another 9 years. Because you remember there were 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, and then he said there were 2 years into the famine when his brothers came. So that's another 9 years, right? For a grand total of 22 years. From his father's house until he accomplished what God sent him there in the beginning. 22 years. And in those 22 years, he was betrayed by his brothers, put into a pit, sold into slavery, in Potiphar's house, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison. in prison, forgotten by the man in prison, spent an extra 2 years in prison after the man said, I would. And they ended up in the palace, 22 years. The point, it requires patience. It requires trusting in the Lord. It requires waiting on the Lord. Because if you get ahead of God's program, if you get ahead of God's timing, you're coming out on the short end of that. You see? But this whole timeline, everything that happened, the Lord was with Joseph. That's good news for us. Because we find ourselves sometimes betrayed by people who we trust, right? We find ourselves sometimes enslaved to things and to people. We find ourselves sometimes lied upon, and falsely accused and put somewhere where we don't belong. Isn't that right? But through all of this, we know, and the scripture and the story teaches us that if we're faithful to God, God is with us, and he can prosper us in those circumstances.
Yes, sir.
Because the Lord was with him in the pit. The Lord was with him in Potiphar's house, prospered him. The Lord was with him in prison, prospered him. The Lord was with him in the palace, prospered him. You see, I'm under the impression, I truly believe in all my heart, that as Joseph was serving in Potiphar's house and as he was serving in the prison, he was serving as unto the Lord. And the scriptures clearly teach that that's the attitude that we should have. When we're on our job, your boss may be a tyrant, he may be a pharaoh, he may be, just out the box. But that shouldn't matter to you in your job performance. You conduct yourself as though you are working unto the Lord. You see, and the Lord is going to deal with the boss, and the Lord is going to deal with the folk on the job. But what you're doing is you're conducting yourself in such a way that you're demonstrating your faith in God. And God is going to benefit you. You see? Here's another lesson that we learn from the story of Joseph. Joseph's gifts were instrumental in him reaching the palace. His gift was, he was a master of dreams. God gave him the ability to interpret dreams, right? And it was the using of his gifts that propelled him to the palace, because he interpreted the butler's dream. And it was the interpretation of the butler's dream that caused the butler to recommend him to Pharaoh to interpret his dream. And it was the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream that propelled him to second in command over all of Egypt. Here's the point. Had Joseph not used the gift that God gave him, he would not have reached the destination God had for him. You see, had he sat on his gift, he wouldn't have made it where he needed to be. That's a question for us. What are you doing with your gifts? Because if you're sitting on it, if you're not utilizing it, then you are hindering, the process of God propelling you to where he wants you to be. Now, let's talk about gifts a little bit, because someone asked last week, what about these gifts? Do I have gifts? If so, how do I know? How do I use them? Let me give you some scriptures on that. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 16 says, "A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men." Would you not say that's what happened in Joseph's case? Joseph's gift made room for him and brought him before Pharaoh. I think about in the contemporary time, I think about people like Martin Luther King, who had a gift, for oratory, for speech. Martin Luther King had a gift for speaking, and he had a passion for justice and equality in his country. So he used the gift that God gave him to accomplish and it brought him before great men. This man won the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, they don't give those away like talking about. He used his gift, and his gift propelled him to where God wanted him to be. Unfortunately, his journey was cut short. But I can think of many people in history, in our contemporary times, who had used their gifts, you know, and through their gifts, God put them where he wanted them to be. Here's another scripture. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7. Now, in this context, Paul was talking about celibacy. He was talking about, you know, it's not good for a man to touch a woman and so forth, but, you know, you can't contain yourself, get married. But here's what he said in verse number 7. For I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. The gift he was talking about in that context was the gift of celibacy. Everybody don't have that gift. He had the ability to be celibate and not be distracted by that. But here's the principle. The principle laid down in this text is that everybody has a gift. That God gives everybody a gift. He may give you a gift to do this and you a gift to do that. But we all have a gift, right? 1 Timothy chapter 4:14. Paul told Timothy, do not neglect the gift that is in you. And that's one of the things that we do. We neglect the gift that is in us. And I want someone else to read this from Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 8. I need someone to read that. Paul, you have that strong voice. Read that for me. Someone else get 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 10 and 11.
Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not have the same function, so in Christ we, who are many from one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is...
Stop right there for a second. Just pause, right? Just pause. He says, and he compares the gifts that God gives to the human body, the human anatomy. He says, just like you have one body, but this one body has many members on it, and they all don't do the same thing. They all don't have the same function, but they all still one body. And he says that the gifts, just like that, God gives gifts to people. And he gives the gifts to people according to his plan, his purpose. In other words, God gave you, Paul, the gift of singing and encouraging people through song because that's what he wanted you to do. You know, he gave someone else the gift of service because that's what he wanted them to do. You know, and let me say this before you move on. People will hate on you because of the gift that God has given you. People will hate on you. You know, they hated on Joseph because Joseph told them what his dream was about, what his gift was. They hated on him, right? Throughout history, history books are filled with people who have been hated on because of the gift they had. They hated on Martin Luther King because of his gift. You see? So don't think and don't be afraid to use your gift because people will hate on you. Because they're going to hate on you whether you use it or not. Amen. So go on and use it. Paul, go on and sing. You know, go on and do what God blessed you to do. Because that's what's going to propel you to where God wants you to be. And if you don't use it, number one, you lose it. Number two, you have to give an account as to why you didn't use it. Yes, sir. See? Yes, sir. The lack of using your gift can land you in a place you don't want to be. You see? Go ahead, finish reading, Paul. Talk about your gifts.
If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep in your spiritual favor. Serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality.
That's good. Thank you. You see that list of gifts that he had, that he gave? What were the gifts that he listed? What in layman's term, everyday term? One of them was teaching. God has given some people the gift to teach, right? He gave some people the gift of leadership. Some people are great leaders, great administrators. Some people are great servants. You know, some people are great givers. Some people have a gift to be able to give, not only of their time, but of their means. All of these are gifts that God has given. Isn't that right? We all don't have the same ones, but we all have one. Matter of fact, that was the argument that Paul used to deal with the issue in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where the Corinthian Christians were fussing and fighting over what they considered to be big gifts. Speaking in tongues, interpreting tongues, prophesying. They were saying those who had those gifts were more important than those who didn't have those gifts. And Paul took an analogy from anatomy to demonstrate to them it doesn't matter what gift you have. All of the members of the body are equally important to the function of the body.
Yes, sir.
And not only that, even if you had these gifts and you didn't have love, it didn't matter anyway. You know? Now think about your body. Let me ask you a question. Show of hands. Who in there has any spare parts on their bodies? Who in there has a part on their body that they don't need? Huh? Anybody have a part that they don't need? How about your little toe? Is that important? Why? Just a little bit, little got a corn on it, a little gnarly, crusty, look like a little chicken claw growing on it. But if you cut it off, guess what? You have to learn how to walk all over again. Your thumb. You think that's important? Try not using your thumb. Try using your hand without the thumb and see how hard that is.
Yes, sir.
You know, to maneuver your hand without using your thumb.
Yes.
Here's the point. All of our members are important. They all have a function in the body. Not only that, he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, can the eye say to the ear, you know, because you're not an eye, you're not important? Can the mouth say, you know, to the lips or the nose, because you're not the nose, you're not important? They're all important. Some of them are out front. You see what they do. You see what the eyes and the hands and the ears do. But then you have some other parts that's hidden. Your heart, your liver, your lung. You can't see those parts, those members. But guess what? They're important to the body. Because if they stop working, the body is in trouble. Isn't that right? Here is Paul's point, and I see your hand. Paul's point is it doesn't matter what your function is. If you are part of the body, you have a function. Doesn't matter how big or small your role is, it's important to the body. You see? And the eyes can't tell the little toe you're not important because you're not an eye. God doesn't look at it the way, you know, we look at each other. We look at each other as damaged goods. You know, God doesn't look at us like that. And God doesn't look at what we are, he look at what we can become. He look at what he can make out of us. See, we're looking at what we can make of ourselves, you know, and if we look at it through those eyes, we in trouble. You know, that's where faith comes in. You know, you have to look at it from God's perspective. I said that some of our body parts, some of our members are not seen, you know, but they function, they're important to the function of the body. So it is in the body of Christ. You know, we see what the preacher does, we see what the teachers do, we see what people do. But what about the people who go out and you know, visit those who are shut in? What about those who bring communion to people who cannot come to the worship service? People who send cards and make phone calls. Those people are just as important to the function of the body, to the mission of the Lord's church, as people who get in the pulpit and stand in the classroom and teach these classes. They're all important, you know. So never minimize your value, never minimize your role in the body of Christ, because it is crucial to the function of the body. Go ahead, Paul. The objective of worship is God. The objective of all of the service that we do, the utilization of our gifts, all of this is in worship to God. When the Lord encountered the woman at the well in John chapter 4, and he said, or the woman said, our father worshiped in Mount Gerizim, you worship, in Jerusalem. Jesus said, it's going to come a time when it doesn't matter where you worship, but it's going to be how you worship. In verse number 23, he said, but the hour cometh and now is when the true worshipers shall worship who? The Father, in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. Verse 24, God is his spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The object of our worship is God. Yes, sir. And so everything we do has to be, with the end in mind of worshiping God, exalting God, of glorifying God. If it's about trying to get any glory for ourselves, we're not worshiping God. If it's about trying to, have a big head and saying, I'm doing it, it's not about God. You see? It's all about God. That's the objective. Yes, sir. And it doesn't matter how small or seemingly menial your part is. If it is using the gift that God gave you for the purpose of worshiping God and glorifying God, it's a good thing. Yes, it is. You see? And God can take you a little bit and do a whole lot with it. One of the things that the lady kept saying today, this 100-year-old lady that our video today being interviewed, one of the things she kept saying over and over again, she said, my motto is to serve those who are less fortunate than me. She says, I believe that's why God still has me here, because I serve people who are less fortunate than me. Right. And here is a lady 100 years old taking care of her 80-year-old daughter, who was incapacitated. That's a blessing, y'all. But I love her attitude. Her attitude is, just let me serve. And she was telling about all of the things she did, how she feed the hungry. She said anybody in the neighborhood who was hungry came to her and they had a meal. She sold, she cooked, she cleaned, she took care of people, she raised children who weren't home. She had a servant's heart, and it was a very powerful, powerful testimony. And I was blessed to be a part of it today. All right, let's move on, because I need to wrap up this. Huh?
Remind you of Lydia?
Yeah, yes. Lydia definitely was a servant. She had a servant's heart. One other thing I think about, too, when you talk about the people behind the scenes, how important they are, there's a story, I remember where it was in Acts somewhere, where some people were after Paul, and Paul was let down a window in a basket. Yes, sir. But guess what? They had some folk was holding the rope to let Paul down. Now, if those people didn't hold that rope, Paul wouldn't escape death. You see, the rope holders were just as important as the man who was in that basket. Your role may be a rope holder. Your role may be support, But do that role to the glory of God. Because God can take big things, make big things out of those little efforts that we give. Isn't that right? Now let me just close with this. And this is kind of fast forwarding a little bit. We hadn't gotten to this point in the story, but I just want to bring it up. Joseph finally understood that God had been directing him. Joseph finally understood, that God had placed him in the palace. When you look at Genesis chapter 50, when his brothers are standing before him, and we're going to read this, we're going to look at it next week. When his brothers were standing before him, Joseph said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. I'm here today because this is where God wanted me to be to save your lives. He finally understood that was the purpose of him being there. And that all of these stops he had to make along the way were part and parcel of God's plan to develop him so that when he got to where he needed to be, he'd be ready. If we had that mentality about our lives, if we viewed our stops from that perspective, I believe they'd be a lot easier to deal with. You know? But if we look at it from the standpoint as Satan wants us to look at them, you know, why you have me here? I don't deserve this. You know, you did me wrong. That's the wrong way to look at it. Look at it as a stop along the way to your palace.
Yes, sir.
And ask the question, not why me, but what is it you want me to learn, Lord, at this stop? Because whatever it is you want me to learn at this stop is going to help me when I get to the final destination of where it is you want me to be. You see? Go ahead, brother.
Just to say quickly, you just reminded me of something a 5-year-old girl told me one day. She says to me one day when I looked troubled, she said, don't be troubled. Always remember that Satan uses your past to try to destroy your future, but God will use your future to break the yoke of your past.
I like that. I like that. When you have in mind, when you keep in mind that God has a better place, you know, I may be at this stop right now, but God has somewhere better for me that he wants me to be.
Yes.
Whereas Satan will have you to look at, well, look at where you were. You know? Example, Joseph started in a pit, ended in a palace, but Moses started in a palace and ended on the backside of a desert.
Yes.
You see? But it's all about how you look at it. Because Joseph, you know, had to go through the pit, the prison, the Potiphar's house, the prison, in order to prepare him for the palace. Moses was already in the palace, but he had to go through the desert to prepare him for God wanted him to do. So then you can't put God in the box, even with that, because we don't know what stops God has in store for us, depending on what destination he has for us. But rest assured that whatever it is, God is in control of it. And if you are faithful to God, and if you wait on him, he will be with you no matter where you are. That's good news, y'all. It teaches you a lesson that you can share with someone else that'll benefit them as well. What I thought about as you were speaking was James chapter 4, verse 13 beginning. But James said, go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain, whereas you know not, but shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even as a vapor. It appears for a little time, then vanish away. For ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and we shall do this or that. You see? One of the things you do, and it's okay to plan for the future, but always consult God. You know, the mistake we make is that we try, like you said, we try and plan way down there. Well, God may not have plans for you way down there. You know, his plans for you may end tomorrow. And so whatever your plans are, you consult with God about it, you know, and take it one day at a time. You know, if it's the Lord's will, I'll do this or I'll do that. You know, as with the rich fool in Luke chapter 12, that was his mistake. He had plenty of stuff. You know, he had too much stuff his barns couldn't hold him. So he said, I'm going to tear down my barns, I'm going to build greater barns, and I'm going to do this and do that. You know, tell my soul, you had much good stored up for many years. Well, who told him he had many years? You know? Take thine eat, drink, and be merry. God called him a fool.
Yes, sir.
And said, tonight your soul is required. And all this stuff, you made all these plans for, someone else is going to have that stuff. You see? So he made plans for life, but he didn't make any plans. You know, he had a lot in his physical bank account, but his spiritual bank account was NSF. You know? And that's so it is with a lot of people today. But let me just say this last thing about Joseph, and then we're going to have to quit. I'm going to talk till Tim gets out here anyway. But let me just say this last thing. The end result of Joseph's journey, you know, him being in the palace, outweighed all of the trouble it took him to get there. You know, when you put it on a scale, what it is he accomplished once he got there versus what it, the pain and the suffering and the loneliness and the discomfort that it took him to get there. When you put that on a scale, the good outweighed the bad. And here is why. Because the purpose of him being in the palace was to preserve the lives of God's people. Had Joseph not been in position, to supply food for God's people would have died. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, Jesus Christ came from these people. So if the lineage had stopped there, Jesus would have never come here. And had he never come here, we would still be in our sins. You see the big picture?
Yes, sir.
You never know what God has in store for your life. And remember I said at the beginning of this class, life is about living, learning, and sharing. You live, you experience that, you share it with someone else to help benefit their lives. But sometimes the things that we go through in life are not for us, for now. Sometimes the thing we go through now is so that God can benefit someone else way down the line. You remember the man who was born blind? Luke chapter 9? 38 years this man was blind. And when the question was asked, well, who did sin that this man be born blind, him or his father? Jesus said, neither him or his parents died, but that the power of God may be manifested. This man was born blind 38 years. You see, sometimes what we go through is not for us, and it's not for now. It's for someone else way down the line. And if you look at it like that, and realize that God is using you as a vessel, to bless someone else, it'll help you to get through it. Next week, we're going to pick it up again. Thanks.